Molten rivers of lava surged across the land, roaring like an unstoppable inferno. Beneath it all lay the 9 circles of hell, a boundless abyss blazing with eternal fire. And deep within that abyss, the strongest of demons gathered, each one radiating a power that could shake the heavens. Within the 9th circle, a relentless battle raged without pause. This fight was fought to crown the mightiest demon. One adversary's horns gleamed, adorned with golden rings. The opposing red demon was encased in armor bristling with spikes. The demon wearing golden rings readied himself, muscles coiling to strike. The 2 demons collided fiercely, their battle shaking the very ground. The red demon landed a solid blow to his opponent's cheek before raising his fist for another powerful strike. Thunderous explosion erupted, sending a shock wave that blasted stones meters ahead into the air, hovering above the ground. The red demon watched the smoke spiral skyward through the swirling dust. A golden horn emerged accompanied by a voice expressing disappointment. The golden ring demon sneered, reminding that rumors from the 9th circle raised high expectations for his challenger, the great demon. Gargus sank to one knee, dismissing the attacks as mere tickles. He bellowed Palik's name, fixing his gaze on the red demon, whose fists were clenched in resolve. Palik, the formidable demon, smirked and remarked that his opponent was far too talkative, rising angrily into the air. Gargus demanded to know who was claiming to talk too much. The 9th circle of hell was momentarily lit by a brilliant flash from a massive explosion. Flames from the devastating strike were visible, even at the furthest reaches of the abyss. The blast hurled burning stones skyward, scattering them across the fiery landscape. The shock wave radiated for kilometers as Gargus was propelled sideways, unable to halt his momentum. With a sense of satisfaction, Palik soared swiftly out of the engulfing flames. He clenched his fist tightly once more, preparing to strike again. Another strike ignited in a brilliant surge of golden light. Stones hurtled through the air, aimed directly at the demon. In the next moment, he pushed himself away and charged forward to attack. His eyes sparkled with the thrill of battle as Palik clasped his hands firmly and gritted his teeth. With determination, he quickened his pace, deftly dodging the stones. Hurtling toward him, Gargus tumbled forward, hitting the ground head first. Palik descended rapidly toward the earth, glancing at his enemy's fall. He thrust off the ground again with renewed force. Blazing like a rocket, he propelled himself toward his opponent. Gargus plummeted uncontrollably as Palik closed the distance to deliver the strike. The demon's clenched fist radiated a concentrated, overwhelming power. He launched another assault, triggering an explosion that whipped the air into a frenzy. A cloud of dust spiraled upward, and suddenly something snagged. Unexpectedly, Haley's focus sharpened as monsters surged in from all directions, surrounding Magreen. One-eyed demon steadied himself, preparing to strike, caught off guard. Haley responded with a fierce growl, dismissing the assault as nothing but feeble tricks. He turned with a devilish grin as several green demons swarmed his arms and legs. Helix smiled with a predator's hunger. At that moment, Gargus burst from the dust, roaring furiously, leaving the others bewildered. A furious stream of flame erupted from Gargus's mouth, incinerating everything in its path. Gargus smirked with smug satisfaction. The ground beneath the demon liquefied into molten lava. Suddenly, he realized the battle was spiraling beyond control. Helic erupted from a pillar of swirling dust and earth, his fists blazing with fiery energy. He launched his assault, commanding the enemy to cease their frivolity. Rising swiftly, he struck the demon again, as a new explosion illuminated the depths of the 9th circle of hell. Gargus raised his fist to strike just as Pollock closed in on him, moving swiftly with intent. With a fierce scream demanding the enemy's demise, Gargus unleashed an attack that bathed the demon's form in a blinding flash of light. Pollock closed the distance and delivered a powerful blow, declaring himself the mightiest demon of the 9th circle. A colossal sphere of molten lava slammed directly into Gargus, shaking the ground beneath them. Alex swiftly leapt to the side, narrowly evading the devastating attack. The demon hit the ground hard, and gazing at his fallen adversary, mused that no one had expected a definitive victor to rise from these endless battles. Palak's eyes ignited with the fierce spirit of combat, the day that stranger first appeared. Overcome with unease, Palak averted his gaze, lowering his eyes in submission. He knelt respectfully upon the crimson carpet, joined by countless demons behind him, all assembled within the Demon King's grand throne room. Seated upon his throne, the Demon King himself radiated power, his armor shimmering with an ominous purple glow. The Lord of Hell regarded his subjects with sparkling eyes that gleamed with calculated command. Bowed, Palak summoned the courage to ask the Lord of Hell why he wished to return when all of Hell lay at his feet. Uneasy silence settled once more over the vast hall, thick with tension. The Lord of Hell fixed his piercing gaze on his servant. His form writhed in purple flames, sending a shiver of dread through Palak's body. The demon absorbed the overwhelming presence, sensing the boundless, insatiable thirst that radiated from it. Relentlessly, he devoured demon after demon, siphoning their strength and annihilating 7 mighty princes, so powerful that none could conquer the others. He rose above all others, wielding a power that enabled him to consume demons at will. The other demons trembled, convinced that the Lord's wrath was about to be unleashed. Palak sensed through the tips of his hair a menacing maw opening above him as he braced for the impending feast. Only one question echoed what was held within his grasp. With a languid gesture, the Lord raised his hand and informed his servant that he had been trapped in this pit for a staggering 10,000 years. He gazed upon the identical landscape, his sole purpose reduced to ruthless slaughter, overwhelmed. The Lord buried his face in his hands. Removing his mask, the Demon King Kanu revealed his human face, crying out in despair that he had lost all purpose for conquest. Seizing the moment, Palak clenched his fist and eagerly proposed that the Lord must be hungry. He promised a delicacy and commanded his minions to retrieve it at once. The demons rolled a massive platter toward the towering Lord, and Palak explained that, although the Lord had devoured tens of thousands of demons, this humble offering should be accepted as a gift from his devoted servants. Palak grasped the lid covering the dish. Resting on the plate was the severed head of Fokkeller, the most formidable beast now presented as a token of tribute. Kano thrust the head toward the servant, declaring his refusal to consume it. Felek immediately acknowledged the misstep. The head lay soaking in its own slime, as the man expressed his revulsion and refusal to ingest such a monstrous offering. Connor bit his lips, struggling to suppress his emotions. He fixed his gaze on his demons. As waves of formidable power radiated from him, he pictured a mouth-watering dish and declared his craving for a hearty kimchi stew. Halok repeatedly whispered the dish's name, striving to commit it to memory. The demons raised their hands, eagerly exclaiming that kimchi stew perfectly satisfied the insatiable appetite of their demon king, as thoughts of succulent raw meat tempted them. The Lord cut in sharply, labeling their focus as short-sighted, grinning with carnivorous delight. Pellet cracked his knuckles and asked whose head might serve as the stew's base, or whose entrails could be extracted, urging the Lord to name a victim, promising to rip them apart to honor the king. To this, Kanu muttered wearily that such a creation wasn't kimchi stew at all. Demons lacked any culinary knowledge, consuming only defeated foes. Without a second thought, Palet clasped his hands with a knowing smile, acknowledging that the Lord's boredom demanded drama, akin to the demise of the 7 princes, an idea the other demons eagerly endorsed. Meanwhile, Kanu, nearly tearful, insisted he yearned for novels and manhwa instead. With a thunderous fist to the ground, Palek bowed his head and declared that if he couldn't satisfy the Lord, then at least his own death would provide entertainment. Tears of loyalty welled in Palek's eyes as Kanu shouted angrily at him, demanding to know what nonsense he was swallowing. Despite Kanu contemplating the loss of someone dear, Palek still pardoned his promise to kill him, releasing a heavy sigh suddenly. A soft chuckle echoed across the red carpet, drawing everyone's gaze to the demoness with a captivating figure, who boldly inquired if she might become his cherished beloved, clicking her heels with confident poise. Lilith gracefully strode down the carpet. All the demons watched the succubus queen with deep admiration and reverence. Renowned as the most exquisite beauty in hell, she gently placed her hand over her chest as she addressed the Lord, her sharp teeth pressed against her lips, in a deliberately seductive manner. Tears streamed from her many eyes, as Lilith questioned whether her love alone was insufficient for him. For a fleeting moment, Kanu's expression hardened into an impassive mask, placing her hands softly against her face. Lilith declared she was entirely at his mercy that night, prompting Kanu, taken aback by her boldness, to state that he had expressly ordered her not to approach him. Even one step, Lilith responded with a playful giggle, teasing that he seemed flustered by her presence. A tentacle curled around the Lord's hand as she inquired, "What is your name, Lord of the Ninth Circle?" The demons watched the unfolding scene, their expressions a mix of envy and discomfort. Hanu struggled to push Lilith away, internally reminded that the succubus, known for absorbing male energy, was far from the image of a gentle lady. He resisted, fiercely pleading that she leave him alone, admitting silently that, by comparison, even Palok appeared almost endearing. He understood that appearances could be deceiving, yet a deep fear gripped him. Clenching his fists, Konu declared his desire to return to Earth. He carefully surveyed the demons before him and insisted that he must return to that realm. Palek and Lilith were stunned when Palek expressed his feelings so passionately to the Lord. Yet Kanu's resolve had not wavered over 10,000 years. It had only grown stronger. After enduring 10,000 years in hell, the final prince, Baal's defeat cleared the path for him to finally return home. Kanu folded his hands in his lap, convinced that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Rising abruptly from his throne, he strode past the servants, confident that his 10,000 years in hell would soon yield their reward. Turning to Palek, he commanded them to begin preparations for the ritual without delay. Palek hurried after the Lord, attempting to speak, but Kanu cut him off before he could say a word. He fixed a lethal glare on the servant, silently warning him not to force a repetition of his orders. Palek immediately dropped to his knees, pleading for forgiveness and assuring that he would prepare everything promptly. The demon shifted slightly and instructed others to summon him on and assemble the statues of Hell's 7 princes. The demons promptly began executing the command. A demon resembling an ancient bird raised its hands and intoned a chant in a mysterious, indecipherable language. An eerie melody echoed relentlessly around the statues of the dark princes. Between the statues, a pedestal began to emit a radiant glow. Palek pointed to it and announced that all preparations were complete. Lilith's expression sank into one of deep sorrow. He tried to address her master, but Kanu had already discarded his armor. He strode purposefully toward the portal. As Kanu ascended the steps, a demon resembling a bird suddenly addressed him. The dark sorcerer Ammon gazed at his master and warned that channeling so much magic into the statues of the 7 princes of hell could warp the fabric of time and space, inevitably creating a dimensional rip. Konu moved ahead, instructing him to commence the ritual without delay. Enveloped in a swirling cloud of magic, he fixed his eyes on the statues of the 7 princes of hell, hopeful that this moment would finally allow his return home. Closing his eyes, Kanu unleashed a surge of demonic energy from his hands that surged into the core of 10,000 demons gathered before him. The powerful current burst forth, swirling inward as it began to coalesce into a glowing sphere. Faint drop echoed through the chamber just as the core detonated, releasing an immense surge of energy in all directions. A towering pillar of radiant light shot upward from the explosion's epicenter. Its brilliance was so intense that gazing upon it was an impossibility. Amon shielded his eyes with his hand, captivated by the formidable and awe-inspiring magic display. As the enchanting song echoed above the statues once again, one of the colossal figures appeared to swivel its head. Ever so slightly the eyes of the statues ignited, glowing fiercely in response to the raging energy enveloping them, illuminated by the core's radiant light. The statues came alive as Amon concluded the incantation. He spotted the Overlord stationed before the dimensional rift, and announced that all 7 statues had now been awakened. This meant the gates would soon swing open. Connor draped his cloak tightly around himself, reflecting that even if he returned, he would have no family, no lover, and no friend awaiting him. Stepping toward the rift, he convinced himself that this fate was preferable to remaining in this wretched, desolate place then. With a resolute breath, he declared it was time to go. Lilith called out to him, but the Overlord didn't even glance back. Kano's eyes widened in shock when he heard the anguished cries of Lilith and Pelek, both demons weeping bitterly, unable to believe Vlaka truly intended to abandon them. Shaking his head, Connor urged her not to cry, tightening his cloak around himself, while silently acknowledging how deeply her desperation unnerved him. Lilith blushed, hugging herself tightly, and whispered that such heartfelt words filled her with a love so profound it felt as if her heart might burst. Tears spilled and trickled softly down her chest. Out of the corner of his eye, Kanu noticed a glistening liquid escaping. Shimmering quietly, he recoiled in disgust upon hearing Lilith express her desire to accompany him. Cursing under his breath, Kanu launched himself in a single leap straight into the rip. Lilith watched helplessly as Kanu descended deeper and deeper into the abyss. The boy turned back abruptly when Lilith shouted she would follow him, no matter what dangers awaited. With a smirk, Connor glanced over his shoulder as he fell, making a crude gesture toward her, and coldly declaring he had never been glad to meet her, and hoped they would never cross paths again. Kono sank further into the depths, reflecting that he had languished in this hellish pit for 10,000 years, devoid of any past he wished to change or future he truly desired. Below, a luminous sphere shone brightly, and he instantly recognized it as the Earth he knew. Konu touched down close to the glowing sphere. Filled with joy, his cheeks flushed red, as he whispered to himself that everything was finally about to unfold. Suddenly the sphere glittered intensely, and the system window alerted him to an atomic fissure detected. The dimensional protection system. Gaia was functioning correctly. A red grid enveloped the entire space. Konu scanned his surroundings, bewildered by the sudden events. Multiple system windows flashed simultaneously, warning that the core's energy output was surpassing normal levels. As he pondered the chaos, Konu heard confirmations that all dimensional protection mechanisms were actively operating. System window flashed a warning, indicating that the Gaia system was experiencing an overload. Electric currents surged through the protective grid in sharp flashes. In rapid succession, numerous electrical discharges struck Kanu from all directions. The system window reported a critical error. Core's fractures could no longer be fully repaired. Kanu screamed aloud as he felt the terrifying sensation of selective compression begin, desperately wishing for it to cease. He winced as another bolt of lightning coursed through his hand. His vision grew heavy, and with a curse slipping from his lips, he struggled to stay conscious. Uttering an insult directed at an unseen foe, he succumbed to unconsciousness. Abruptly, Kanu's eyes snapped open, met by a dim ambient light surrounding him. Lying on a bed of grass amid towering trees, he concluded that bathed in sunlight and surrounded by verdant forest, he must be on Earth. He made an effort to sit up, determined to assess the state of his body. His gaze fell upon the system window, reflecting his current status. Kono stood at the threshold of awakening, still at level 1 in the first stage. He wielded the formidable power of a devourer. His attributes marked as Strength 8, Physicality 7, Intelligence 8, Vitality 9, and Magic 12. What caught his attention most was the note beside the column, stating that special skills were locked, leaving him stunned that his true abilities were sealed away. Suddenly, an intense roar erupted from behind him. Konu swiftly turned toward the source of the sound. From every direction, goblins surged closer, closing in on him relentlessly. Goblins launched their assault, and Konu realized these creatures were unlike any he had ever encountered before. Brandishing his sword, Konu aimed to eliminate all the goblins with a single powerful strike. But suddenly he sensed an absence of the usual surge of energy coursing through his body. The demonic force at the heart of the 10,000 demons was faint and weakened. Unrelenting, the goblins closed in, ready to strike, clenching his fist. Kanu resolved to rely on his raw strength in this moment. His eyes ignited with a fierce red glow as he struck down multiple foes with a single devastating blow. Kanu's form morphed into the dreaded demon Shabnak, unleashing the blade's full power, while his irises burned a persistent red. As another goblin charged him, a system notification appeared, confirming that Kanu had successfully slain the ordinary E-class monster. He cleaved the goblin cleanly in two, and a system window displayed the experience points he earned from the kill driven by battle fury. Kanu's expression hardened as the system announced his advancement to level 4. Finally, he knelt solemnly, surveying the lifeless bodies of the defeated monsters around him. He narrowed his eyes, reflecting on how his accumulated experience was more than mere numbers. He genuinely felt more powerful within. The ground was littered with lifeless, blood-soaked goblins. Connor rose to his feet, contemplating the need to gather intelligence about this unfamiliar environment. He extended his hands forward and unleashed the Devour spell. As the magic crackled around him, he realized he had acquired knowledge about the monsters, but remained ignorant of the world's nature. The system window indicated he had earned 1 point of magic, leaving him astonished as he murmured the word to himself, walking through what felt like a field of bones. He considered that if this world housed a hellish power, then he was certainly far from Earth. Clutching his head in disbelief, he remembered enduring every circle of hell, driven by the hope of returning to Earth. A weary scream suddenly drew his attention. Startled by the cry, he pulled his hands away from his ears. He spun around, sensing that the sound did not belong to a demon or any known monster. The scream echoed again, and Kono recognized it as a human's desperate call, activating the power of Veil. He accelerated until only swirling dust lingered, where he had been moments before. Rees blurred past in a streak, as Kanu silently reminded himself that in 10 millennia, he had only ever encountered monsters with tentacles, and countless limbs thus. Anyone with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth deserved to be called human, regardless of their appearance. Kono's cloak billowed wildly as he prayed the figure had no tentacles. A mere thought of Lilith sent shivers through him, making the absence of tentacles his highest priority. At last he spotted a cluster of monsters encircling a solitary man. The silhouette seemed to radiate light, and Kanu silently hoped it was indeed a man. First 2 eyes emerged, then a nose, and finally he took in the figure of the girl completely. Kanu fixed his gaze on the stranger, confirming with relief that she truly lacked any tentacles. Tears of pure joy streamed from his eyes as he quickened his pace toward the rescue. A goblin raised its weapon menacingly above the girl. She exhaled, sharply shut her eyes, and leaned heavily against a nearby tree. Suddenly a shadow darted in, and the deadly strike was averted. Stunned, she opened her eyes in disbelief. Kono was just dispatching the final monster. After leaving a trail of fallen foes behind, he approached the girl. Kanu extended his hand, offering support to help her rise. The stranger's gratitude revealed a stunning beauty as she thanked him. Their hands met, and Kanu exhaled. Captivated by the moment, his eyes and mouth widened in astonishment. As a blissful sensation washed over him, he struggled to conceal the emotions welling up inside. She expressed her thanks for saving her life, and introduced herself as Hansol. Kano trembled with nervous excitement, prompting Hansol to ask in confusion what was wrong. He grasped her hand firmly and pulled her gently closer. With an unexpected brightness, Kanu proposed marriage, surprising Hansol completely. Blushing and beaming, Kanu repeated his marriage proposal with fervent devotion. Hansol was utterly perplexed, trying to grasp what he meant, prompting Kanu to steady himself, as he realized he had been getting carried away. With an awkward smile, he released her hands, apologized, and then introduced himself. Seeing Hansol injured, Kinwei quickly asked if the wound was painful, to which she attempted to downplay it as minor. However, it soon became clear that her knee was bleeding from a significant cut. She faltered and leaned heavily against Kanu, at which moment her phone slipped out of her pocket and dropped. Kanu's eyes widened in astonishment as he recognized the distinct, rectangular shape of the device. A phone lay abandoned on the grass. He gently helped Hansel to sit up, realizing she was truly on the ground, and softly advised her not to strain herself. He promised to tend to her wound, prompting her to express her gratitude once again. Grabbing his coat, he tore a piece off and reassured Hansel not to worry, silently reflecting on how natural it felt to talk to her so openly. As Connor wrapped Hansel's wound, he recalled that to preserve his mother tongue, he had forbidden speaking the demon language in hell, insisting they communicate only in Korean. He thought back to Palik's efforts to learn Korean and felt a quiet satisfaction that he was finally speaking Korean with a human, not a demon taking a seat beside Hansol. He smiled and said this way would be easier, to which she responded with another heartfelt thanks. Kano picked up the phone and returned it to its rightful owner. Hansel's fingers brushed the screen, which immediately illuminated upon contact, revealing the year 2023, marking that 5 years had passed since he had plunged into the abyss. Settled beside Hansol, pondering that if his understanding was correct, monsters would have emerged on Earth over the past 5 years. He then spoke aloud, remarking that it must be challenging for a girl to navigate this new world, and suggested they take a break. Internally, he acknowledged how much the Earth had transformed, realizing he needed to gather more information. Curious, he looked at Hansol and inquired what brought her to such a remote place. The girl explained that she was surprisingly hunting alone inside the gate. Feeling bashful, she admitted that she had awakened only yesterday as a player and ventured solo into the E-class gate to hunt. She then called herself foolish for doing so. Kanu's mind raced with thoughts about solo hunting and the nature of players. Out loud, he asked about her level. She responded that she was currently level 6, having just awakened, but expressed curiosity about what a formidable player like Kanu was doing here. He felt a pang of embarrassment, realizing his level was lower than hers, and simply replied that it was just how things happened. Watching her closely, he understood why she had drawn that conclusion. As Hansol shifted, she inadvertently brushed Kanu's shoulder. Her stomach let out a loud growl from hunger, causing her to flush with embarrassment. Hansol suddenly stood up and offered to leave immediately, but Kanu winced, mentioning the intense pain from her wound, and then asked if she was certain she could manage to walk. Her bandaged leg trembled slightly, yet Hansol reassured the others not to be concerned. As she nearly stumbled, Kanu quickly grasped her arm, pledging to assist her, but Hansol anxiously protested, unwilling to become a burden. Kano tightened his hold and urged her to accept his help, promising to lead her wherever she needed to go. She replied that she should head toward the entrance. Understanding her, Kanu smiled warmly, feeling as if he was finally conversing with a human being for the first time in 10 millennia. As they walked along the forest trail, Kanu reflected that, although he had bungled his self-introduction initially, things seemed to be improving, and she showed no suspicion about his true identity. Encouraged, he resolved to continue adapting to human society. At the entrance, Kanu and Hansol exchanged satisfied smiles, feeling content with their progress. The gateway appeared as a swirling portal of deep blue and black hues. Turning back to the forest, Kanu contemplated the possibility of traversing space through rifts. Realizing this place wasn't exactly Earth, he glanced back at the portal and noticed no visible machinery capable of generating a rift, which made him curious about what was sustaining the gate's open state. Hansol released herself from Kanu's embrace, declaring she felt stronger now and urging them to move quickly. Together, they stepped through the swirling portal. Kanu raised his hand to shield his eyes from the overwhelming brightness ahead. Suddenly the light shifted to a warmer hue, and Kanu blinked open his eyes in startled surprise. He noticed a man shouting about assembling a team to hunt goblins at the E-class gate notably. This man had two eyes. Kanu then glanced at two men, scrutinizing details on the system window. One remarked that no tanks were available today, and Kanu observed they shared the same nose. He turned his attention to two others, debating the idea of recruiting bandits. The boy mused on how they each had a single mouth and, intriguingly, no tentacles, surveying the bustling street teeming with people. Kanu took in the vibrant scene around him. A wave of nervousness washed over him as the reality of his return truly sank in. Tears of pure joy welled up, glistening in his eyes. Meanwhile, something unexpected caught Hansel's attention. Her leg began to tremble slightly, sending sharp pains through her. Kneeling down, she softly proposed that if Kanu didn't mind, she would like to invite him to dine at her home. Kanu felt his face flush at the invitation. The girl appeared endearingly shy, as she admitted feeling uneasy, but expressed a sincere desire to treat him as a gesture of gratitude. With admiration, Kanu reflected that it felt as though spring itself had blossomed within him. He smiled warmly and joked that she had left him with no alternative but to accept. He admitted that the offer was simply irresistible. Just then, their exchange was abruptly interrupted as someone demanded they wait. Out of nowhere, two soldiers approached Kanu and Hansel, stating they needed to inspect the players' identification cards. Hansel promptly displayed her card, while one soldier insisted that Kanu show his as well, muttering a curse under his breath. The man grew frustrated. He exhaled deeply, resolved to reveal it now, conceding silently that no help would come, so he must rely solely on his own skill. Suddenly his eyes shifted to a menacing shade of toxic green, feigning the act of handing over the card to the astonished soldier. He actually manipulated the soldier's perception, compelling him to see the card as he intended. Standing just behind the soldier appeared the demonic figure Dentalian, master of illusions, prompting Kanu to respond with a rude gesture. This trickery was what led the soldier to mistake it for a mere playing card. As the soldiers chatted, one urged the other to prepare since their shift was about to end. Kano thought he had finally escaped detection and suggested that Hansel accompany them. They stood before a 5-story building when the girl pointed out that this was their home. Turning around with a sheepish grin, he explained there was no elevator, so they would need to climb the stairs. Kano inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar scent of the old house. With joy, they ascended the narrow staircase together. Kano traced his fingers along the chilly wooden banister. His gaze lingered on the thick layer of dust covering the window. Clenching his fists, he felt a profound sense of reality finally settling around him. A smile spread across his face, and a blush warmed his cheeks as he realized that, among all the places on Earth, he was truly returning home to Hansol, where a joyful future awaited him in his mind. He joyfully declared that this marked the promising beginning of a new chapter in his life. Suddenly Hansol opened the door and warmly greeted her mother, who was taken aback by her unexpected arrival. The burst of joy and fierce emotion vanished from the protagonist's face as his mother embraced her daughter eagerly, anxiously asking if she was hurt or alone. With flushed cheeks, Hansel softly replied that she was not by herself. The protagonist silently wondered in confusion. Is this truly my mother? Is she really just here to feed me? He questioned himself with a sense of dissatisfaction. Moments later, Hansol introduced Kanu to her mother, gesturing toward the protagonist standing in the hallway. She explained that he had rescued her, so she invited him to join them for dinner. Upon hearing this, the mother readily agreed, her face lighting up with gratitude. I am truly thankful to you, she said sincerely, holding the protagonist's hand tightly with both of hers. She bowed her head in gratitude toward Kanu for saving her daughter, and confessed she was unsure how to repay such kindness. No need for thanks, the protagonist responded quickly and humbly, releasing the hand of her daughter's savior. The mother regained her composure and guided Kanu inside, gently urging him not to linger in the doorway. She assured him that although their means were simple, they would always provide a hearty meal. Hearing this, the protagonist offered a warm smile and expressed his gratitude to the hostess. Internally, he felt uneasy about sharing their meal, but quickly reminded himself it was acceptable, since he had endured great suffering in hell. At that moment, Hansel's mother headed to the kitchen, calling her daughter over to help arrange the table. Without hesitation, the girl hurried over to assist her mother. Hansel glanced quickly at her phone and, noticing the notifications, asked her mother if she had really sent those messages. Her mother promptly confirmed and stressed that she must always keep in touch whenever she embarked on a dangerous mission. Spotting the phone in the girl's hand, the protagonist realized he needed more information about Earth. Without hesitation, he turned to Hansel and requested to borrow her phone, briefly explaining that he had misplaced his own. Hearing his request, the girl smiled warmly at the protagonist and replied, of course. With that, she handed the smartphone to Kanu, encouraging him not to hesitate. She then added that dinner would be ready shortly. Taking the phone, he immediately raised it to his face and blushed with delight. Internally, he reveled in the familiar tactile sensation of the smartphone, calling it a magical feeling, especially after so many years apart. Suddenly, his expression grew serious. Removing his coat and settling into a chair, he resolved to focus. The protagonist knew he had to gather vital information. He pondered where to begin, and after a few moments, concluded he should start by reading the news from 2018. Immediately after these thoughts, he entered a query about news from February 1st, 2018, into the search engine. He uncovered a report stating that on February 22nd, 2018, the world plunged into chaos, as mysterious portals began opening across the sky, unleashing thousands of monsters. Conventional weapons proved completely ineffective against them. The Chinese Communist Army attempted to mount a defense, but their efforts quickly dissolved into carnage. Enormous beasts resembling humans with bull-like heads rampaged, mercilessly devastating everything in their path. Reports indicated that a global defense alliance had been established under United States leadership, with South Korea becoming the 9th nation to join this unified front. As he visualized the silhouette of the very first American player, the protagonist wondered deeply about the identity of this mysterious girl. Suddenly, he read that thousands of players had appeared worldwide, imagining countless young men and women wielding extraordinary powers. The protagonist pondered whether these individuals could truly represent humanity's last beacon of hope. As he continued scanning the news, he stumbled upon an article titled Holocaust Day, published on February 22nd. Seeing this date, Kanu recalled his final moments in the old world and realized that it was precisely then that he was drawn into a nightmarish hell. Afterward, he placed his hand thoughtfully on his chin, glanced away, and wondered in disbelief if that very day marked the portal's opening and his fortunate arrival there. Then he hissed softly to himself, reminding himself that news articles could say anything. After saying this, the protagonist resumed swiping through his phone, telling himself he needed to uncover more information, when suddenly Hansel called out that dinner was ready. A steaming pot of food was placed across the table. Setting his phone aside with a bright smile, the protagonist gratefully thanked the hostesses. Suddenly his eyes widened in astonishment. Really, he exclaimed joyfully to himself. Directly in front of him rested a whole pot of mouth-watering stew. Hansel promptly wished the protagonist a pleasant meal. At that moment, cold beads of sweat appeared on Kanu's forehead, staring in disbelief at the dish before him. He couldn't believe it was kimchi stew. Kimchi stew, he shouted, inwardly overwhelmed with happiness. A few seconds later, he gingerly raised a spoonful of the stew to his lips. Inside the spoon was rich broth and a tender piece of meat. Meanwhile, Hansel's mother glanced at her daughter and encouraged her not to fall behind and to start eating. The girl, smiling warmly, expressed her gratitude to her mother. The protagonist, however, hesitated, murmuring to himself with uncertainty. Kimchi stew, Kanu whispered softly. Hearing this, Hansel turned to the guest with a look of surprise. Moments later, the protagonist, hand trembling slightly, lifted the spoon to his mouth. Suddenly, he emptied the spoon's contents. The mother and daughter watched the guest expectantly, anticipating at least some kind of reaction. Kano began chewing the dish vigorously and with obvious enjoyment. Without hesitation, he lifted a heaping spoonful of stew and brought it to his mouth once more. Moments later, the protagonist emptied the spoon again, thoroughly savoring each bite with eager chewing. Shortly after, he grabbed a bowl of rice and eagerly dipped a spoon into it. Immediately following that, he voraciously devoured spoonful after spoonful of rice, leaving Hansol and her mother astonished at his insatiable appetite. Lost in memories, the protagonist reflected that thousands of years, close to 10,000, had elapsed. He admitted he didn't know how he ended up in hell, recalling the blood-red sky and the countless monsters soaring through it. Kanu explained that to survive, he had to transform into something demon-like, absorbing demonic energy. He recalled sitting atop many demons he had slain, consuming the flesh of one. Konu noted that although he had become demonic, his human palate remained unchanged. So these infernal delicacies held no real pleasure for him. He vividly remembered, greedily sinking his teeth into the devouring demon's meat, his wild eyes reflecting his hunger as he bit deep, swallowing demons while struggling to breathe. After tearing off a chunk, he chewed the demon's flesh with great effort. The repulsive taste lingered. Kano explained that throughout those years, he had lived in a delirious haze. He remembered how unable to chew a particularly tough piece, he spat it out in frustration, choking as the bitter meat left his mouth. Yet despite enduring this torment for 10,000 years, he never completely lost his sanity in his own mind. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Mucus dripped from his nose, and drool escaped his mouth. He explained that he hadn't lost his mind, because he was living within a dream, and that dream was simply to find his way back home. Hanu recalled the anguish of weeping bitterly, surviving on the flesh of monsters, all the while longing for the comfort of home. He whispered softly and with joy to himself, "I truly am back on earth," as his memories faded into tears and sobs. Tears continued to flow freely from his eyes, while he steadily chewed his rice. Suddenly alarmed and a bit frightened, Hansol asked Kanu what's wrong. Tears continued to cascade down the protagonist's face as he sobbed. While looking toward Hansol, "Thank you," he murmured sincerely, adding, "Thank you very much." Meanwhile, beads of sweat appeared on the faces of the girl and her mother. The protagonist smiled warmly and said, "It tastes wonderful." Hansel's expression revealed only surprise, her face otherwise neutral. Then suddenly blushing at what she had heard, she looked down and said with a gentle smile that it was actually she who should be thanking Kanu. Gazing at the table, which held just a pot of soup and a salad, she apologized for not having anything more impressive to offer. Afterward, she glanced at the protagonist and, smiling, asked if he truly enjoyed the meal. Hearing this, Konu lifted his tear-filled eyes to meet hers and responded enthusiastically. As he eagerly continued to eat, he suddenly asked if he could have more. Upon hearing the request, Hansol sprang to her feet, promising to bring it immediately, filling her mother with joy that they could finally satisfy the wish. Tears streamed down the protagonist's face as he touched the bowl of rice, quietly reflecting on how wonderfully comforting home truly felt. Suddenly, he looked up to find Hansol standing before him, her cheeks flushed and a gentle, sweet smile grazing her lips. Without warning, a deafening explosion shattered the apartment door, sending shock waves through the room. Amid the dense cloud of dust whipped up by the blast, only the faint outline of a lone figure could be discerned. Filled with terror, Hansol and her mother rushed forward urgently to uncover who was responsible for the chaos. The intruder slammed his foot down on a massive stone slab on the floor, forcing it to crack beneath the pressure. A young man with short blonde hair stormed into the room, hands buried in his pockets, shouting fiercely for Hansol to leave. It was Henny, her brother. He advanced deeper into the apartment, his presence growing more menacing with every step. Confronting the girl, he demanded aggressively who authorized her to enter the property at will. Hansel's expression hardened, her features dominated by fierce anger and deep-seated resentment. She said softly but firmly, her voice laced with quiet determination. Henny responded with anger, glaring at his sister as he demanded an explanation, unable to contain her fury. The girl shouted back, demanding to know who he thought he was, to barge into her home uninvited. "Stay back," Hansel warned, her voice rising with authority. As she declared herself fully prepared for confrontation, dread flickered across Henny's eyes at her newfound resolve. Suddenly, a quiet, restrained chuckle broke the silence. Hansel glanced at her brother in surprise, just as Hentai lost control and erupted into loud, uncontrollable laughter. He waved his hand dismissively from side to side, questioning whether she was truly a genuine skill player now. Without warning, he slammed his hand against the wall, shattering it, and demanded how someone as insignificant as Hansel could be considered a true player. The girl, flushed with anger, waved her hand, fiercely yelling for her brother to keep his distance. Henny ignored her protest and instead glanced behind his sister, where their mother cowered, trembling with fear just beyond Hansel. Seeing this, he turned away in disgust, harshly remarking that not only had their father died young, but their mother was also a coward. Hearing this, Hansel lost control and lunged at her brother, shouting in fury that it was Henny's actions that had brought them to this plight, rather than retaliate with insults. The man grabbed his sister's hand firmly and dragged her along, declaring they were headed to Andrew's guild. Hansel struggled instantly, shouting defiantly that she would never align herself with such a disreputable guild. Then Henny paused, turned toward her with a wild grin, and confessed that all he wanted was for her to join a reputable party. No matter how fiercely Hansel struggled, she was unable to break free from his grasp. In desperation, Hansel bit down hard on her brother's hand, making blood spur from the wound. Struck by sharp, intense pain, Henny retaliated by striking his sister forcibly. The mother instantly dashed to her daughter, who lay on the floor, screaming in agony. Henny clutched his bloodied hand, his fury blazing uncontrollably. Veins bulged on his face from sheer rage. His skin flushed crimson as he glared at his sister, demanding fiercely if she truly believed surviving in this world could be so effortless. Struggling to contain himself, he loomed over Hansel and their mother's embrace, and sharply told his sister to be silent and accept becoming his sacrifice. Then abruptly, he challenged her claim of being a fully fledged player. His eyes burned with madness, and his voice dripped with contempt and hatred as he stared at his sister, daringly proposing, if that's the case, then let's settle this with a fight. Upon hearing this, the mother immediately rushed to her son, pleading desperately for mercy and offering to take her daughter's place. She grasped her son's hand firmly with both of hers, but he brusquely commanded her to remove her hands when the mother refused to release him. Henny violently shoved her aside, with a harsh strike, causing her to fall to the ground with a cry. Witnessing her brother's violent act against their mother, tears welled up in Hansel's eyes. She hurried to her mother's side, who lay unconscious on the floor. As Henty coldly warned, "I told you so." Rage contorted his face, disdain flashing in his eyes as he warned his sister, "Don't provoke him, Henty." Hansel whispered tearfully, turning to face her brother. Fury blazed fiercely in her gaze, cradling her mother protectively. She felt utterly lost, unsure of what steps to take next. Meanwhile, Henty sneered sarcastically, challenging her, boasting proudly that he had already reached the second stage of awakening. As he glanced arrogantly at his sister, Hansel said nothing in response. Her jaw tightened in fury as she struggled to suppress a flood of tears. Suddenly leaning closer with a mocking grin, Henny taunted his sister, questioning if she seriously believed she stood any chance against him. Without hesitation, he grasped her face roughly and declared that her only asset was her beauty. Clutching his sister in frustration, he bellowed that all Hansel needed was to join Andrew's guild, to outrank the eldest sibling. Suddenly, a loud, crunching noise cut through his tirade, prompting Henny to turn away abruptly. He faced the source of the sound and spotted the protagonist contentedly devouring a hearty stew. Fuming, Henny demanded, "Who the hell are you?" directing his anger at the protagonist. Ignoring the question, Kono continued to consume dish after dish, without uttering a single word, releasing his sister. Henny's fury surged once more as he confronted the protagonist. "Don't you realize what's happening here?" Tears welled up anew in Hansel's eyes as she watched her brother approach Kano. With an aggressive tone, Henny advanced toward the table where the protagonist sat. Warning, "Listen up." Kanu remained indifferent to Henny's words, focused solely on his meal. Puzzled, the rival wondered whether he was serious or simply dismissive. After a brief pause, he scratched the back of his head, turned away, and started to leave. In a sudden sharp turn, Henny struck the table forcefully, sending all the food crashing down. Spilled stew splattered directly in front of Konu's shocked face. Hansol clasped her mouth in terror as tears streamed down her cheeks. Henny's face twisted with fury and hatred, his teeth clenched tightly in rage. The stew cascaded onto the floor, while the protagonist, still clutching a spoon mid-bite, struggled to grasp what had just occurred. At that instant, Hansol erupted into a loud scream, urgently calling the protagonist's name. Suddenly, Kono let out a terrified scream as kimchi spilled everywhere, tears streaming down his face. He then collapsed to the floor, bending over the mess of spilled stew. Her brother, bewildered, turned to the protagonist and demanded, "What's wrong with him? Where did you find this homeless stranger?" he suddenly asked his sister. The distress vanished from Hansel's face, replaced by a confused silence as she struggled to respond. "Hey, you." Henny snapped hands, shoved into his pockets, glaring at the sobbing protagonist. Then nudging Kanu with his foot, he commanded, "Stop crying and get up." Without warning, Kanu whirled toward his aggressor, fury blazing in his eyes. A fleeting look of fear flashed across Henny's face, making him hesitate just long enough to stop. "How dare you?" the protagonist yelled, his voice crackling with anger. At that moment, a demonic apparition seemed to materialize before Henny, as Kanu growled furiously from his knees. "How dare you spill my kimchi?" An overwhelmingly powerful and sinister energy suddenly engulfed the entire room. "My kimchi!" the protagonist shouted angrily, his fury radiating like a wave of horror that forced Henny to stagger backwards. Suddenly, he bit down hard on his lip, clenched his fist tightly, and readied himself to launch an attack. At that instant, a vivid blue flame flickered up along his fist. A bead of sweat traced down his cheek as he stared at the protagonist, telling himself it was just a trick of his imagination. Suddenly, a projectile shot into his hand. Even Henny's eyes glowed fiercely with blue flames. Turning toward the source of the projectile, he demanded what just happened. Behind them, Hansol stood gripping her staff tightly, shouting urgently for Kanu to flee. In that moment, a long blade materialized from the protagonist's hand. Witnessing this, Hansel's tears abruptly ceased. At the very same time, Kanu surged forward toward his adversary. Still bewildered, Hansol held her staff defensively before her. By then, the protagonist had closed the distance to his opponent. As much as possible, fury blazed in Henny's eyes. Though caught off guard, he convinced himself that Kanu couldn't possibly be that fast. As he came in from the left, Henny realized a swift strike was aimed at him. Kanu's face remained expressionless, yet his eyes burned with a fierce scarlet flame. Attempting to block the strike from the left, Henny simultaneously missed a powerful knee thrust to his chest. Was it feint, he wondered. Immediately after these words, a spray of drool escaped from his mouth. He instantly clenched his teeth, fury boiling within him. Without hesitation, he charged at his opponent, shouting a fierce battle cry. His fists lunged toward Kono, but he narrowly missed, landing a punch to the face. Moments later, a powerful kick struck his back, extinguishing the flames and gulping his hands. Blood trickled steadily from Henny's nose. Grimacing and grinding his teeth, he gripped his opponent's leg with one hand, silently noting its weakness. Immediately, he toppled Kano, preparing to strike swiftly with his free hand. But at that precise moment, he once again failed to block a fierce kick aimed at his face. Turning his back to his adversary, the protagonist released a sharp, elongated blade from his hand. Blood erupted anew from Henny's nose and mouth. Seizing the moment, the protagonist lunged toward his opponent, swinging the blade with deadly intent. Henny swiftly countered, striking with increased speed. But at the last instant, the protagonist ducked, evading the fiery blow at that instant. Drool mixed with blood sprayed from Henny's mouth. Realizing it was a feint, he narrowly avoided a devastating punch to his side. Within seconds, Henny's fists lost their fiery glow, and he collapsed to all fours. Panting heavily and clutching his side, he pondered over Kanu's true identity. Suddenly his face was slammed forcefully into the ground. As the protagonist pressed his foot against his opponent's head, enraged, Henny strained to lift his arm, desperate to rise once more. "I'm not finished yet," the protagonist declared suddenly, and in the same instant, he drove the blade from his own hand straight into his opponent's palm. A piercing, heart-wrenching scream erupted immediately. Leaning down, Henny Kanu sneered mockingly, remarking that he acted like a grown man, yet complained like a little girl mad in his fury. Hatred and contempt blazed in the protagonist's eyes as he glared at his rival, vowing to make him pay for the spilled kimchi. Blood streamed from Henny's wounded hand as he lifted his head, glaring furiously and demanding why anyone would get so enraged over some kimchi. Upon hearing this, Kanu grabbed him by the hair, radiating an incredibly powerful and terrifying aura that seemed to consume the surroundings. Raising Henny's head to meet his own gaze, the protagonist demanded what he had just said about the stew. Beads of sweat appeared on Henny's forehead, terrified. Henny scrambled to find an explanation for his words before he could utter a single word. His face was slammed back down onto the floor. "What did you say about my kimchi?" The protagonist roared in fury, continuously pounding his opponent's face into the ground. With relentless force, Kano clenched his teeth in anger, desperately trying to restrain his tempestuous emotions, suppressing any further outburst. Suddenly, he stopped and released his grip on his opponent's hair, leaning close to his rival's face. He commanded that whenever he said one, Henny must respond with kimchi. Then he added that upon hearing two, Henny should answer with food of the gods. When silence followed, he pressed the blade further into Henny's hand and ordered him to shout louder. One Kono said sharply, "Kimchi." Henny replied. The protagonist roared in fury, striking his opponent's injured hand so forcefully that blood gushed out like a flowing river. Tears streamed down the man's face as blood poured from his nose. "Kimchi," Henny screamed, his voice frenzied and wild. Without hesitation, the protagonist declared, his eyes obscured as an overwhelming aura surged, filling the entire room with a powerful presence. "Food of the gods," Henny bellowed with every ounce of his strength. "No, no, no," the protagonist muttered in frustration as he looked down at his defeated opponent. He shouted louder, commanding him to summon the image, as if he were earnestly praying to a divine being. Hansel watched the entire scene with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment, yet she did not interrupt Kanu's actions. Curious, the protagonist screamed for his opponent to infuse every fiber of his being into the declaration. His rage was so intense that his teeth transformed into fangs. "Kimchi is the food of the gods," Henny shouted, tears streaming down his face. Upon hearing this, the protagonist gritted his teeth in anger and shouted no. His eyes blazed with a fiery scarlet glow as he leaned closer to Henny. "This is not enough," he commanded fiercely, before ordering him to shout again. At this, the man inhaled deeply, steeling himself for another powerful scream with all his might. He shouted, "Kimchi is the food of the gods," so forcefully that blood erupted from his mouth and his teeth scattered in every direction. After that, silence fell over the room. Kanu had finally calmed down all right. He said quietly as he withdrew the bloodied blade from Henny's grasp. Then he rose to his feet. Kanu glared at his adversary, eyes blazing with contempt and fury, warning him never to desecrate Kimchi again. Lying on the floor, drenched in blood and tears, Henny struggled to comprehend what had just happened, his body too weak to move or rise. Eventually, the apartment was thoroughly cleaned and restored to order. All the rubbish and scattered debris were carefully gathered, and neatly stacked Hansel's mother lay on the couch, while her daughter attentively wrapped a bandage around her head. The girl appeared deeply anxious, consumed with concern for her mother's well-being. Even after tending to her mother, she refused to leave her side, remaining vigilantly close. In the kitchen, Henny stood washing dishes, bewildered, as he wondered how he had managed to persevere through it all. A thin trickle of blood dripped from his nose. The young man was half naked, his coat nowhere to be found. The protagonist sat back at the table, feet casually propped atop it, exuding a sense of control. He sipped his tea, calmly dressed in his rival's clothes. As he browsed his phone for information, tears welled and streamed from Henny's single, intact eye as he scrubbed the stew bowl. As he rinsed the plate, his reflection revealed clenched teeth, revealing the anger simmering within. "Why must I endure this?" he muttered, casting a sharp glance over his shoulder at his tormentor. Suddenly, the protagonist placed a cup on the table. The sharp clink caused Henny to shudder in fear. Without even glancing at Henny, Kanu immediately asked what was wrong, inquiring if he was truly upset, just because he had to endure all this over kimchi. Startled, Henny suddenly shouted back, fearing he might be reprimanded once more. The protagonist remained silent, instead fixing the man with a look of pure disdain. Henny glanced nervously over the protagonist's shoulder, sweat beads trickling steadily down his face. Lost in recollection, Kanu suddenly began to remark that Henny enjoyed a life of comfort, wearing clothes, eating well, and living in ease. He recalled the time he had ruthlessly slain demons, one after another in the depths of hell, feasting on their flesh. Recalling the bitter taste of demon flesh in his mouth, he urged Henny to value and be thankful for what he had. "Cherish your life," he added, returning from his memories and locking eyes with his opponent. "Understood," Henny blurted out in panic, mentally warning the protagonist to just wait and see what he was capable of. He turned away again, veins bulging from his fury, vowing that once he reported to Andres, the protagonist wouldn't remain unscathed. Suddenly, Kanu shouted "Hey," startling Henny deeply. The protagonist threw his hands behind the back of his chair and said, "Come over when you're finished with the dishes." Rising and leaning on the table, he voiced his thoughts clearly. Before him stood a trembling hentai, so frightened he dare not move. Abruptly, Kanu declared he saw no reason to spare the man's life, convinced that nothing worthwhile could come from him. Hearing this, terror gripped the man. Fear shone in his eyes while cold sweat drenched his face. The protagonist coldly insisted the world had no need for him. Suddenly, the protagonist seized him by the collar, pulling him close and reassured. "Don't worry, I won't kill you." A wild grin spread across his face, eyes blazing with an intense purple fury. At that moment, he proclaimed that if he were Hunt, he'd rather choose death in that instant. Something strange began altering Hunt's mind. His consciousness was overwhelmed by a powerful force. The protagonist invoked a formidable spell called Demon Orobus. Before little Hunt, a massive and fearsome demon materialized, extending its hands toward him, an embodiment of raw terror. Rattling the man, the demon roared in a voice dripping with fear, while pleading desperately to be released. Then Orobus lowered his massive head, pressing his third eye against the man's forehead, and he found himself ensnared by shadowy hands, staring at a horrific blazing demon, eyes soaked in blood, burning fiercely before him. Overwhelmed by the sight, Henny screamed in sheer terror, as tears streamed uncontrollably down his cheeks. As the protagonist faced Henny emerging from the trance-like state, horror alone darkened the rival's expression. Fear consumed his face. It was then Kana warned that no words should be spoken about what had transpired, for fear seeps deep into the victim's soul. After uttering these words, the protagonist pointed sharply toward the exit and commanded Henny to leave. "Fear reduces a person to a mere puppet. You're utterly pathetic," Kanu sneered, lounging in his chair and deliberately turning his back on his prey. Consumed by terror, Henny, his underwear damp from anxiety, hesitantly made his way toward the exit. Hansol observed the scene silently, her gaze fixed on her brother as he reluctantly exited. Internally, she repeated the words to herself, overwhelmed by the familiar sense of dread. Then, turning her attention to the protagonist, she remarked on the stranger who had come to her rescue. Throughout the ordeal, Kanu remained absorbed, scrolling through something on his phone without lifting his eyes, reflecting on Henny's words. He recognized the unsettling truth behind them. Sweat trickled down his face as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully, muttering to himself that he truly had become a homeless man and urgently needed money. Suddenly, a crucial idea struck him. He had just found what he was searching for. He quickly pulled up a Wikipedia article detailing the properties of magical stones. Without hesitation, he turned to Hansol and asked if she owned any magic stones. Promptly, the girl nodded and reached into her bag. Moments later, she placed a magic stone gently into the protagonist's palm, explaining it was an E-rank stone she had obtained from a goblin. The instant the stone rested in his hand, he unleashed a powerful spell upon it, recalling that the darker the stone's hue, the greater its magical potency. He closed his eyes, channeling energy into the stone. Hansol stood quietly beside him, her warm smile inviting a response. Suddenly, Kanu whispered to himself, feeling no trace of magic at all when he opened his eyes. He examined the stone closely and acknowledged that a certain power was indeed trapped inside it. But it wasn't magic. His thoughts drifted back to the forest battle, recalling that he had acquired some form of magic during that encounter. He pictured himself defeating monsters and collecting magical stones to obtain magic, confirming that his initial assumptions had been precise. But this felt different, he mused, gazing intently at the magic stone resting in his palm. Suddenly he realized that a magic stone doesn't contain magic itself, but rather embodies a distinct form of energy known as magic. He pondered deeply, stroking his chin, as he questioned himself where exactly this magical energy originated from. Unable to answer immediately, he resolved to investigate further later. Gratefully, he returned the stone to Hansel's hand and silently decided that he needed to gather more stones to sell them all. Those thoughts brought to mind the 2 soldiers he had encountered and what he required for this plan. Before finishing his sentence, he turned to Hansol and inquired if there was a player activity management office nearby. The girl responded, holding the stone thoughtfully. She looked up and explained that there wasn't one nearby. The closest main office was located near Seoul Station. After a moment's reflection, she admitted she also wanted to go there and proposed that they travel together. Upon hearing this, the main character rose to his feet and inquired about her reasons for going there. Hansol glanced at her mother and revealed that their family situation was far from stable. Then, staring at her magical stone, she confessed that her reckless decision to pass through the gate stemmed from this. And only now did she fully grasp how dangerous and foolish it had been. After saying this, the girl turned to the protagonist, her face lighting up with a warm smile as she thanked Kanu sincerely. Scratching the back of his head in mild confusion, the protagonist said he simply wished to assist good people, even though in his mind he reflected that in the last 10,000 years he had encountered only demons. With determination, Hansol clenched her fist and declared that this was precisely why she wanted to master the basics and advance to the second stage of awakening. Looking at the girl, the protagonist remarked that he had finally found an angel among them. Hearing Hansel's stories, she blushed and laughed, admitting she intended to do everything she could, but was not planning to assist him just yet. Kanu added, gesturing broadly to the side. The protagonist asked, "Then shall we go?" To which the girl promptly responded that she first needed some time to prepare. At that moment, Hansel retreated to her room, leaving the protagonist alone in the kitchen. Muttering to himself, he doubted that traveling with someone so fragile would allow him to operate at full efficiency. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a chilling coldness. Heartless though it seemed, he spoke nothing but the stark truth. Meanwhile, Hansel busily prepared herself, selecting her outfit, while Kanu silently insisted he didn't need distractions. His sole focus was regaining his lost power. Later, he approached the window and declared that, after a long 10,000-year absence, he had finally returned to Earth But he had to grow even stronger to endure what lay ahead. Gazing into the horizon, he affirmed that he must reclaim the fierce strength he once possessed, just as he had endured in hell. Suddenly Hansel's voice rang out from behind, asking if Kanu had any identification. The question startled the protagonist, who after a brief pause, suggested she first visit the district administration office. After some time, the protagonist finally held his newly issued ID card in his hands. He found himself riding the subway alongside Hansel, examining his ID. He remarked that he had successfully reissued his identification. He recalled his visit to the immigration office where, somewhat confused, he asked if he could now collect his ID. The receptionist assured him it was ready and available for pickup. Hearing this, he scratched the back of his head, still unsure but relieved, and internally wondered with surprise whether anyone had reported him missing. Clutching his ID, he stared at it quietly, telling himself bitterly that no one had thought of him all this time. For 5 grueling years, he recalled sitting alone at school, not a single person nearby. He remembered nights alone at home, eating nothing but plain noodles. Suddenly, instead of noodles, a strange piece of demon flesh filled his mouth. Overcome with fury, he muttered, "There wasn't a single one." Before his eyes flashed an image of himself devouring a demon. Then Hansel's voice called out sharply, pulling him back to reality. In an instant, "Look," she said, pointing ahead. "We're almost there," she added with a smile. At that moment, the protagonist lifted his gaze, saw an impressive sprawling complex framed by a stunning vista, and the girl beamed with delight. Slipping his ID into his pocket, he realized that everything was about to change. "So beautiful," he said once more, turning to Hansel with a warm smile. As the train came to a halt, the announcement declared that all passengers had reached the Players Association. They informed everyone that the exit was on the left, where the escalator descended. Hansel dashed out first and quickly signaled for the protagonist to follow her. In mere seconds, they found themselves standing before the vast structure known as the Seoul Players Association. Kanu stared in awe at the immense building, visibly stunned suddenly. Hansel instructed the protagonist to take something from her. She handed him her old phone and explained that it had Wi-Fi, so Kanu could easily send updates on how things were going. Cradling the phone in his hands, the protagonist felt an overwhelming joy, though deep inside tears of happiness welled up silently. Girl pointed toward the entrance and said she'd rush to the introductory meeting. Regaining his composure, Kanu smiled warmly, bidding her farewell and mentioning he'd be leaving soon as well, promising they'd keep in touch later. Suddenly, Hansel smiled gently and mentioned she had been there for a long time, then invited him to join her for dinner. "I'm definitely up for that," the protagonist replied instantly, a faint blush coloring his cheeks as joy surged quietly within him. Inside the Player Association headquarters, stepping inside, the protagonist took in his surroundings, marveling at the impressive atmosphere. Observing the numerous groups gathered, he concluded that hierarchy clearly held significance here. Approaching the terminal, he read the instruction indicating the need to stand with an ID. He wondered to himself if the tickets really were issued through this machine. Without hesitation, Kanu slid his ID into the designated slot, and the terminal immediately prompted him to wait patiently. Moments later, the screen displayed a message confirming his application was successful. Kanu's identity had been verified, and his serial number assigned was 18. Following that, the system instructed him to collect his waiting ticket. Grasping the ticket, Kanu glanced at the map with a puzzled expression, unfamiliar with its layout and feeling momentarily disoriented. Suddenly, the card in his hand vibrated unexpectedly. After a brief walk, a path to one of the halls suddenly appeared beneath his feet, and soon he found himself seated on a bench, patiently awaiting his turn. To his left, 2 men engaged in conversation. The taller younger one asked what rank his companion had received in the initial selection. The gray-haired man smiled and revealed that he was assigned rank D. Hearing this, the younger man brightened with excitement and encouraged his interlocutor, saying he could advance to rank B or even higher. During the second selection, the older man chuckled, and remarked that he paid no attention to talents, such as Kang Hyun and Yeonju Curious. The protagonist quickly searched those names on his phone, just as one of the men explained that Kang Hyun and Yeonju were guild leaders, because they had earned rank S in the first selection, making comparisons pointless. Another man chimed in saying that fortunate individuals with an S rank are sometimes invited to join one of the top 5 guilds. Meanwhile, the protagonist kept examining information about the people. They discussed mentioning the 5 guilds. He suddenly recalled reading online that Johan represented the world, Yeonju LED, the guild known as Scarlet Rose. Kang Hyun was associated with Hanul, while Hyunju was also named Sanri. Minwak and Oniri were other prominent names, mentioned in relation to guilds. Pensively resting his hand on his chin, the protagonist observed that Korea was home to only 5 elite guilds, concluding that conflicts among them were likely inevitable. With a satisfied grin, he opened his stats and confidently declared, "What can I do? I'm strong." His face was void of any emotion, yet his eyes blazed with an intense scarlet fire. He realized he had to quickly restore his strength. Glancing at his stats, which showed he was level 1 and in the initial awakening phase, he pondered silently that if he made a mark among the players, he could become even more powerful. Suddenly, it was the protagonist's turn and the doors swung open without delay. Without hesitation, the protagonist stepped inside immediately. Surrounded by many people, a consultant girl approached Kanu, pointing towards another girl and indicating that the protagonist should head in that direction. He carefully approached the table and sat beside her. The girl promptly picked up a magic orb and instructed the protagonist to place his palm on it, explaining that the orb would measure Kanu's strength and change color to reflect his rank. She added that the deeper the orb's color, the higher the rank achieved. As the protagonist reached out to the orb, he inwardly grimaced, reluctant to reveal his card too soon, especially if the highest rank appeared now. After these thoughts, he placed his hand firmly on the orb. Instantly, a bright radiance emitted from the orb, illuminating the entire area. Closing his eyes, the protagonist muttered internally that now he would be exposed. The intense light cast a vivid glow across the girl's face. After several moments, the glowing ceased. F rank, the girl announced calmly, holding up a gray orb as she looked at the protagonist. Upon hearing this, the protagonist was stunned, as the news was completely unexpected.